Put us live.
All right.
All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Optimal Dynamics LinkedIn Live webinar. In these sessions, we dive deep into pressing topics in trucking and logistics. And today, I'm thrilled to jump into our discussion with our customer, Grand Island Express, and how they're improving efficiency and breaking revenue records month after month. I'm Erica Frank. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at Optimal Dynamics, and I am joined by an outstanding team from Grand Island Express, Deen Albert, the Vice President of Operations, and Addison Stout, the Optimal Solutions Specialist. And we'll talk a little bit about that title and the meaning behind it in a bit. Grand Island Express is one of America's most respected refrigerated carriers and has been recognized as best fleets to drive for 13 consecutive years. So let's go ahead and dive in a bit more and learn about the secret to this team's success. So welcome both. It's very nice to have you guys here. Why don't we just start with introducing yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you do at Grand Island Express. Deen, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Okay, I'll go ahead and start. So my name is Deen. I've been with Grand Island Express almost 6 years. I've been in the industry about 25 years. Actually cut my teeth in the LTL portion of the trucking industry and then moved over to truckload. Grand Island Express, I run the fleet operation, all our sales activities and all our recruiting activities. So stay pretty busy in those realms. Addison, go ahead.
Yeah, so my role has just recently changed. I've been with Grand Island for about 3.5 years now. I started out as a fleet manager and transitioned to Optimal Solutions Specialist just this last April. So this has been kind of a new role for me. And so now I'm doing all the dispatching for over the road.
Awesome. Very excited to have you both here. And it's been great working with you and the team for this past year. Deen, for those of us on the call that might not be that familiar with Grand Island Express, do you mind just giving us a quick overview of the business and the fleet and the operations there?
Sure. Yeah. So we're a mid-size refrigerated carrier based in Grand Island, Nebraska. Run about 170 power units right now, and we primarily go anywhere east of Nebraska, sticking along the I-80 corridor pretty tightly, but we do cover portions of the southeast and direct south. We've been on a pretty steady growth path for the last 6 years while I've been here, and prior to that, it's been a pretty steady path as well. We enjoy a really good market position with our customers. We pride ourselves on on-time service and excellent customer service as it pertains to our core customers, and we just look forward to every coming year planning and learning how we're going to grow in the markets that we serve.
What type of cargo are you guys typically carrying?
Yeah, good question. So being in Nebraska, we can't help but haul beef, right? So about 95% of what we haul is boxed beef, both frozen and refrigerated, out of Nebraska. We do haul a little bit of pork as well, but primarily we're hauling beef for our major shippers.
Great. So you mentioned, right, very successful year as the VP of operations, but also overseeing sales and recruiting. What are some of the key performance indicators or the metrics that you're looking at internally to gauge success?
Yeah. So I don't think it's any secret for anybody in the industry that this year we gauged success a little bit differently than we would in a more positive freight cycle, but you know what we were gauging is our our revenue growth, and we did see revenue growth this year despite poor market conditions. We look at our turnover percentage really closely because it's a pretty good proxy for how we're serving drivers. We are also looking at some new metrics. So percentage of driver hour utilization is something that we're really starting to tap into. And then just overall driver productivity gains, right? So again, in a off year for the market, if we're able to provide more efficient ways for our drivers to get more miles, then it's a win. And so those are, probably the big indicators that especially this year we're looking at. If we're able to increase those things in the face of a difficult market, then we feel like we're doing something a little bit differently from our peers.
Right. So you started with revenue growth, right? It's been a very tough market for our industry. But I've been hearing from your team, right? It seems like you guys are hitting revenue milestones month after month. Can you talk a little bit about what's been happening behind the scenes to enable Grand Island Express to hit these new records?
Yeah, sure. And again, we fall back to that tough market. We all know that, anybody in trucking is really not going to see rate per mile gains this year. If anything, they've been small and incremental, but we've seen a lot of rate per mile go backwards. And so, your play as a trucking company is, how do I maximize the resources I have? And so, leading up to this year, we've done a pretty good job of doing just that, increasing our velocity across the network. But we also hit kind of a plateau with that because we did everything that human beings can do to improve those things, and we really needed something to accelerate that. And that's where we started considering optimal dynamics, that it's looking toward driver positioning, and it's looking toward driver events and how to maximize the driver's potential resources throughout the next week or two to make the most of it, even though they might have home time coming up, or even though they might have a PM scheduled back here in Grand Island. Optimal dynamics is doing that math for us in the background, and looking at things that we can't even see in advance, and then all of a sudden you look at what happened in the last 2 weeks, and you're going, oh, okay, I get why I did it. I just wouldn't have seen it coming, right? So it's really been doing a lot of those things where it's poured some gas on the fire to something that we already started. But it's doing it in a way that we wouldn't have been able to have the human resources to handle.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit about how that has impacted, right, the structure there, the operations? Have the teams changed at all?
Yeah, it's changed a little bit of what our people do every day, how they do it. We're looking at 30 to 35% more load count than we handled a year ago, and we're doing it with the same amount of people, if not maybe a little bit less in certain circumstances. To be clear, bringing on optimal dynamics, we knew we were going to see some efficiency in the back office functions. But the goal with that was to allow for growth in a more efficient way, not to eliminate people, right? And so we've looked at it that way. How do we bring on more and more business and do it more efficiently? And so it's changed the fleet manager role a bit. Addison will go into her role, but it's taken the heavy lifting of logistics away from the fleet manager to where the fleet manager is focused on drivers, right? And focused on driver needs, driver wants, driver concerns. And then we had backhaul planners that planned our loads coming back to Nebraska. Nebraska is not a very populated state, so they work pretty hard to find loads coming back. Now we've kind of transitioned them into more of a customer service role, so they're still procuring freight, but Optimal Dynamics is making more sense of that freight and doing the logistics portion of it. And so it's really kind of streamlined our operational focus to the point where we're focusing on the important things, and letting the even though it's a higher function for Optimal Dynamics to do that math, letting those menial things happen automatically, and so it's as opposed to us handling the same amount of freight and needing less people, we decided to go after more freight, and keep our core people that we value.
Yeah, that's a great story right there, right? 30 to 35% more volume that you're able to do this year with the same people, the same team, right? So Addison, you're a key part of this story and this team. As the solo optimal solutions specialist, can you walk us through how your role has evolved from that fleet manager into this new role, and talk us a little bit about, what a typical day looks like in your role?
Yeah. So before Optimal Dynamics, I was a fleet manager. So I roughly had 40 to 45 drivers that I would manage and work with closely. And while doing that, I would do a lot of their managing their hours, their home times, stuff like that, as well as doing the planning for their outbound freight. So anything to keep them moving out of Nebraska. And then the backhaul planners would plan them back into Nebraska. So that was just kind of the cycle we would go through, keep the drivers busy, take them or put them on something to get them going out of Nebraska, wait for somebody to plan them into Nebraska. And so I was one of 5 fleet managers doing that. So I about had a fifth of the puzzle, basically. And so I was doing the best I could with what I had and what loads I was given. Out of 100% of the loads, I had about a fifth of them. And so you also had 5 different minds putting together the piece of the puzzle that they thought was best. And so after Optimal Dynamics came into the picture, I work less with the drivers, but now I do all the dispatching. So I do all the dispatching out of Nebraska, all the dispatching back into Nebraska. And so whereas now using OD, it's way more efficient because, again, you have not 5 people trying to put together a puzzle piece, you have 1. And so I can see all the pieces. And so that's been really cool to see. And so that's kind of my role after. The optimal solution specialist. When we first kind of started talking to OD and saw this potential role, Deen came to me and asked if this was something I would like to take on. And it was definitely, I could see it being a challenge, and I was like, yeah, definitely. And so I took on the role with a lot of pride, especially being like the one person to do all of the making sure all the solutions for the driver or the solution for the load best fit. And so that's been a process, but it's been super helpful with the team we've had, just because I was used to a lot of the freight out of Nebraska. I was used to planning that. I was not used to planning a lot of the freight back into Nebraska. So that was super helpful. We had a great team of the backhaul planners to kind of walk me through that. And as we were learning how OD worked, they were there to definitely help put some of the pieces together as well. So that was kind of my role before and after. A typical day looks a lot different than it used to. So now when I first come in, the first thing I do is look at the optimal matches for the drivers. So I just scan through those. Anything that looks great, makes sense, little to no deadhead, I go ahead and assign it. And so just go through that. nothing's a better feeling than having a lot of loads to assign right away. So that's always a great feeling. So once I go through that, my next thing I do is I just kind of go through emails. I scan through emails and see what may have fallen apart over the night. Drivers may be running late, drivers may get held up. So just kind of scanning on what maybe needs to be rearranged. And so going through emails, checking that out, seeing if there's things I need to switch or put out some fires. And so that's what I do. And then once I start going through some of the emails, that's when the fleet managers start coming in. And that's when they start updating the drivers, updating PTAs, when that driver is going to be next available, sending out the loads that may have been switched and stuff like that. And as they're doing that, it's changing my optimal matches. So I kind of let them get caught up. And then once I do feel like, Optimal Dynamics has refreshed a couple times and has adapted to the new changes, that's where I go back and I go for the optimal matches again. And so just kind of repeat that a couple times. And I do that for about the 24-hour period. So I'm looking at loads within the 24 hours, what tomorrow needs to leave, like on loads, and what drivers need to get going and stuff like that. So usually do that for a little while. And as I go through my 24 hours and if I see things that may need to be covered, that's where I start putting the pieces together myself. And so I will definitely bounce ideas off of some of our backup planners and some of the fleet managers. So they're always helpful kind of filling in those gaps and stuff. And once I get through planning out the 24 hours, that's when I move on to the 48 hours. And it just it's a cycle. It just kind of repeats itself. So going through matches, checking what falls apart, and then filling in the gaps.
That's amazing. Love the story. I mean, basically you had 20% of the business prior, and now you have 100% of the business.
Yeah.
That's great. I mean, you're sort of orchestrating the whole thing and re-optimizing, the system's re-optimizing as we're making decisions. Just an awesome story there to hear how you're able to handle the entire picture, like you said, right? Versus just a puzzle piece in that story. So thank you for that, in-depth look at what the day looks like. It makes me think, right? You're so crucial to the operation right now. What happens if you're out of the office? So I know in a typical operation, right? Vacation, sick time coverage, all of that can be a pain point for planners. How are you able to manage that inside?
We just stopped letting her out of the office.
So like I said before, like I was very comfortable with the load, putting drivers and dispatching loads out of Nebraska. And I wasn't so comfortable with loads coming back into Nebraska, the backhaul loads. And so actually one of our customer service reps for the backhaul planning side, he will usually step in when I'm gone. But he usually is in Optimal Dynamics with me on a daily basis as well. So I will usually go through the optimal matches, and once I go through those, that's kind of where he steps in to help fill those gaps. So drivers that don't have a load yet and freight's covered, so he's the one that usually goes and books them a load, something that to fit that puzzle piece, and vice versa. If there's a load that still needs covered, he'll throw out suggestions on maybe we can move this stuff around. So we work really closely together, and we bounce ideas off of each other a lot. So he's pretty familiar with what I do, especially when I'm gone. And so he's kind of my backup. We also have Jason, who's a sales manager. He's kind of a jack of all trades. He does a little bit of everything too. And so his favorite part is just assigning the optimal matches. So if he sees it, then and OD says it works, then he believes it works. So he'll go through those, and then again, Nate will kind of just fill the gaps when needed. So they're kind of my backup. But again, we work really closely together, all three of us, on a daily basis to, bounce ideas off of each other when needed. So
right, that's great. So there's always this level of consistency that continues even if you have to be out of the office for a day.
Yep. And the good thing too is optimal dynamics has pushed out my window. So I usually work in with a 24 to 48 hour time span, where now I can see out 72 hours. So when I do know that I'm going to be gone, I really try to plan ahead just to make it a little easier for them. So if needed, I can see 72 hours out to help cushion that blow if I am gone. So
that's great. So you hit on a couple of key points there, right? Like Jason really trusts the system. You really trust the system, the optimal matches. So this technology has transformed your role and how the company is operating for load management and dispatching. Can you talk about the training that you went through to get comfortable with something totally new and transformative for the team? And how did you get to a point where you built up that level of confidence in what the system was recommending to you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Just because it wasn't easy at first. It definitely was not easy. It definitely came with its challenges, but the biggest thing was just having an open mind. Like it's going to be different. It's going to do things differently than we think, and it actually really pushed a lot of us out of our comfort zone. And I remember when the customer success team first came down and was kind of walking us through on how to use it, what to look at, and stuff like that. I was kind of going through and assigning loads, and I was doing a lot of things that they probably weren't used to. And I remember one of them saying, "Okay, why are you doing that?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I'm just like, I'm trying to figure it out and stuff." And so he's like, "Okay, well, think of it as like this, like think backwards almost." And so that was like, oh, okay, like crazy, but sure. So that was just the biggest thing, is getting out of comfort zone, doing things a little backwards than we were used to. And I think the biggest point that came from that was, one, the support from the management team. Like there are some days where like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And the way we did it, we just jumped right in. There was no just taking a couple steps here and there. And we're like, okay, as of this week, we're going full send into optimal dynamics. And I don't think we would have had or seen this success if we would have done it any other way. I think it was just a point of like, okay, we got to sink or swim. And so just figuring it out step by step, thinking backwards a little bit, and then just kind of learning what the system likes, what it doesn't like. And then when it came to a point where like, okay, well, OD is saying this, but we're like, ooh, not sure. We were just like, okay, well, this is what they told us, just to trust the system. And so we'd trust it, click assign, and move on. And then seeing the success that came with that's where we were like, oh, okay, we really can trust the system. And when there's things that we're like, ooh, we don't quite understand, that's where we just trust the system, because again, like Dean says, it sees farther out than we do. And so that's kind of where we're like, all right, the system is working. So
That's fun. I like that, the idea of working backwards, right? That's different. And this is such a shift, right? This technology, like we said, we've gone from 5 planners to 1. You're trusting the system. You're using the optimal matches. It's re-optimizing your network for you as you go throughout the day. I mean, that you do have to trust, right? And that's a tough next step for a lot of companies that have been doing it a certain way for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right?
Yeah.
Dean, with all this change, right? Again, getting back to your KPIs, the revenue, the driver utilization, are there any specifics that you have been seeing, like an increase in revenue per driver? Things that you're seeing that since we're using the system, this is what's actually happening with the business?
There have been, and again, we it's tough to quantify some things in a difficult market. So there's certain things that we've looked at really closely, and one is the revenue per driver has been in a steady upswing since May, right? So obviously that whether our truck counts up or down or doesn't that's an equalizer. So if we're maximizing our drivers or at least improving utilization, we should see an upswing, and it hasn't really stopped yet, which is fantastic. And beyond that, again, if you look at revenue per mile on a monthly basis, that's been pretty flat this latter half of the year. So it's not that the market's in an upswing yet. It's operational improvements driving it. So we look at revenue per driver per week for sure. Then a softer metric that I look at really closely, and I'm going to venture to say a lot of trucking companies probably have cycles like this where, in any market you could have a boom week where you blow out your resources, you have really great revenue in 1 week, and it kind of ruins your month because then you have no resources the next 2 to 3 weeks while you're recapturing your cycle. We haven't run into that with Optimal Dynamics. Yes, we've had some big revenue record weeks, but those actually build into a record revenue month, which means we're stringing a huge week along with 2 to 3 really good weeks, and then we're back to a huge week. So what that's telling me is we're not living for the here and now. We're holding back some resources so that we can service that next week and the week after that, and our drivers maintain good hours of service all the way through it. So we're servicing our customer better. We're maximizing the revenue in a month's time frame, as opposed to just singling out this really great week and celebrating that.
That's fantastic. So, and that really talks about everything, right? Revenue, streamlining the operations, positive shifts in your customer relationships, maximizing miles for your drivers, right? So it seems like we're just on a fantastic path this year. What comes next, right? So you're clearly using Optimal Dynamics for your load planning and allocation, your dispatching. Are there any plans to expand beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, we're actually working on. We've been using the bid tool for a few months now. It's helping us recognize pockets of freight that we can help with that we didn't recognize before. So we're kind of anxious to hit the gas a little harder with that. And I think those opportunities are coming up in 2025. So that's really, really exciting. We've also been piloting and using a Optimal Dynamics product called Source, which actually does help us optimize and use some filler loads for those backhauls. So it's in the name of decreasing our empty miles, which have had good suppression so far this year already, and again keeping the drivers in cycle. I mean that's a concept that we've talked about heavily well before Optimal Dynamics, but always struggled to how do we keep them in cycle? Like if we actually had a month where we kept them in cycle the whole month, how did we do that? Did we do that on accident? How'd that happen? And this is helping us make that realization to say, okay, there's tools we can use that ensure the drivers stay in cycle. And that's important when, almost all of our what we consider outbound freight originates in Nebraska. That's really important because our customers expect those drivers to be back to catch that next load, and that helps us grow with those customers.
I assume the holidays are a very busy time for the team too.
Yeah, they are. We've had October was a month without holidays, and we in trucking we kind of celebrate those months, but they are. I mean, it does create some challenges for us from a manpower standpoint, and just from a efficiency standpoint, because with as many drivers that want to go home during the holidays, things like that, it does kind of run you out of cycle. And that kind of what we've seen with the holidays this year is that, yeah, you have that rough week, maybe after the holiday or around the holiday, but we seem to swing back and cycle the very next week, whereas the bigger holidays would actually trip us up for 2 to 3 weeks before we actually come back with a more normalized week. And so it's helping us snap back much quicker because of the things that we can't see and compute.
So as we head into this next year, what are you both most excited about at Grand Island? Are there specific areas that you want to focus on in 2025?
For me, it's just seeing the growth, I guess. 2023, OD was just something that we talked about. And then in 2024, we started using it, and it probably, our adoption rate was, 60 to 70%. And so now in 2025, when it's a full year of using it, just seeing how far we can raise the bar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to echo that. I mean, from my standpoint, raising the bar means handling more freight. We're swinging back to a market where capacity is going to be a premium, and we want to be able to provide that capacity for our customers when they call for it. We can do that much quicker by allowing operational efficiencies to happen than say ordering a truck and trailer, and that takes X amount of time to add capacity. We want to do both, but we can react much quicker when we can create capacity through efficiency.
Yeah, fantastic story, you guys. Thank you so much for walking us behind the scenes, sharing the successes that have been happening in 2024 at Grand Island Express. And we, of course, wish you the best moving forward into this new year. I want to thank you both for joining us. Thank you for everyone else who was on today's call. We hope you found this story helpful and inspiring. As we've seen here, right, the right technology, the right partnership can really help streamline your operations, remove that guesswork that Addison talked about through those automated decisions, and ultimately maximize the profitability for carriers. I know that there were a couple of questions that came through. We're going to follow up offline on those since we're out of time right now. But of course, you can also reach out to us directly here on LinkedIn. And we will see you all soon on the next Optimal Dynamics LinkedIn Live webinar. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.